Welcome to the first virtual reading group for the 2021. My name is Ndeulipula Hamutumwa. I'm honored to be the moderator of this important reading group. I'm equally happy to announce that the reading group is convened by Daisry Mathias, the advisor to the President of the Republic of Namibia on Youth Matters and Enterprise Development in the Office of the President. The objective of the reading group is to promote the literacy and continuous reading through a culture of reading. The 21st series will review modern African literatures, contents from East, West, and Southern Africa. We kick off today with a leading in the 21st century, a call for a new type of African leader by Professor Tshilidzi Marwala. In his book, Professor Marwala reminds us that, and I quote, "The fourth industrial revolution is an era where technology in the cyber, physical, and biological sphere are increasingly converging." Professor Marwala is an authority on the subject of artificial intelligence with 19 books published. He is also my VC and president at the University of Johannesburg, where I recently completed my doctorate studies. Professor Marwala holds a PhD specializing in artificial intelligence and engineering from the University of Cambridge. He has been a visiting scholar at various universities, such as the Harvard University, University of California, Wolfson College at the University of Cambridge, and the Nanjing Technology University in China. He is a scholar of note and an intellectual giant of the African continent. He is currently the deputy chair of the South African Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Professor Marwala will provide a response to Daisy's review of the book, and we are indeed honored to have you, Prof, and thank you for taking time to be with us this morning. We have a diverse mix of participants, and I recognize the presence of cabinet ministers and deputy ministers that are on the platform. More specifically, I recognize our ambassador, Honorable Keamo, all the way from China. I also recognize our our Minister of Higher Education, Honorable Ita Kanji. I also recognize Dr. Harold Naumab, the Vice Chancellor of the Namibia University of Science and Technology. We also have senior government officials, academians that are present in our midst. We have business leaders, and of course, we have young Namibians and our friends from across the continent and the world. And I just want to welcome everybody. As part of the house rule, the session will be strictly 1 hour. And I see that we are just within the 1 hour period that we are having. And to make the best use of the time, I request everybody to submit comments, questions, and contribution under the chat function. We will surely give you opportunity to engage through this arrangement during the discussion. We also want, for those that are following us on all our social media platform, to follow us on #ReadWithDaisry or on our social media platform. So without wasting time, let me dive straight into it, and let me invite Daisry on the floor so that she can begin with her review. Daisry?
Thank you very much, Ndeulipula, for that introduction and for setting the stage for our first meeting as an online community of readers. A warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for, I observe all the protocol that has been established. I recognize our Deputy Minister for Information, Communication and Technology as well, and I acknowledge all our friends from near and far and from the continent and beyond. Thank you again for accepting our invitation. This is an idea whose time has come. It has been greatly inspired by Professor Marwala's own reading group at the University of Johannesburg. And I have come to know Prof to be a ferocious reader and writer, a towering academic on the subject of artificial intelligence. And today, our honored guest, as he will provide a reaction to the review of his book that I will deliver. We are delighted to have you, Prof, and we thank you for you inspiring young Africans like us to read and to write and to reimagine tomorrow. As a way of introduction, on the 21st of March, 2021, a week ago today, actually, Namibia marked a coming of age as we celebrated 31 years of independence and also symbolically entered into the 4th decade of our democracy, marking a new era for governance, for nation building, and for maturation. This year, 2020, will go down in infamy, or the year that was 2020. It was a year where our hopes and expectations were dashed, and as the world plunged into panic, fearing the loss of lives and facing an unknown enemy, which in the period of just 15 months has managed to disrupt our lives and world almost beyond recognition. But all was not lost. And artificial intelligence is undoubtedly one of the biggest winners from this pandemic. And as Prof. Marwala highlights, has actually helped to speed the shift into the 4th industrial revolution, deepening capacities in ways that we would have never imagined. Just for context, the first industrial revolution was introduced the mechanical energy through the introduction of water and steam power. It replaced cottage industries and the manual labor. And the second industrial revolution introduced the electrical power and the mass production, replacing cottage, significantly changing the scale and the speed of manufacturing. The third revolution saw increasingly optimized, automated production lines through electronic power. And for the most part, the confluence of the technologies in the 4th industrial revolution will be an enabler. They will be an amplifier and an accelerator of all the preceding revolutions. So notwithstanding the crisis that we experienced at the onset of this decade, at the beginning of last year, this still remains an era of great promise. And while we accept and embrace the unpredictability and the uncertainty that comes with technologies that are doubling in capability and that are halving in pricing almost on average every 18 months, we recognize that charting our way forward as a nation and as a continent in this rapidly changing environment is going to require all of us to understand the forces that are shaping our present realities. So that is why we're here today. To help us in this undertaking, Professor Marwala has lucidly laid out in his book, Leading in the 21st Century, the call for a new type of African leader. He has laid out 4 essential components to lead and successfully tackle the 4th industrial revolution in the 21st century. Although the book is written on the South African case, I will compare and contrast to the Namibian experience as well. And as we get into the review, the book is premised on 4 key tenets, which I've constructed them into a triangle for the ease of review. On the foundational level, we really have the critical leadership issues that need to be in place and that need to be addressed in order for us to thrive in the artificial intelligence-driven era, where 4IR is predicated mainly on artificial intelligence, but also where artificial intelligence is the technique of making machines to be intelligent. And then at the heart of this triangle, we have the leadership mindset, and we also have some global mega trends that are taking place. And at the apex, as we crown the triangle, we crystallize the leadership lessons and the attributes from prominent leaders of history on the continent and the world. So beginning at the bottom with the foundation, addressing the critical leadership issue. The world as we know it has gone through fundamental paradigm shift, and what is required of all of us is a deeper understanding of the pervasive and the disruptive nature and impact of the fourth industrial revolution on society, and also an acceptance that this dispensation does not have a beginning and it does not have an end, and neither can it be averted or completely avoided. The following levers are recommended in the book to be the essential enablers that will develop our capacities, our capabilities, and unlock tremendous potential for our countries. Number one is prioritizing human capital investments in artificial intelligence, blockchain, and disruptive technologies. And to do that, we need to redesign human capacity development ecosystems. That means linking potential employees to productive and to decent work by identifying the key leverage points that can be accelerated by fourth industrial revolution. Professor Marwala makes this easier for us by highlighting such a point to be essentially skills revolution. He calls it a skills revolution. But what he's saying is that we need to equip primary and secondary school students with a combination of both verbal and written communication, logical and numerical skills, in order for us to feed those skills into the ability to code, to think computationally with holistic approaches to problem solving. Another approach to the human capacity development ecosystem is the tertiary institutions, which need to become more focused on a multidisciplinary training approach through blended curriculum. So you want a combination of engineering with physicists, with technologists and scientists. Establishing the institutional capacities needs to happen nationally in order for us to foster and to enable research and development, which is so underfunded in most African countries, generally on the region. While education systems and industries have low capacities to react, countries like Namibia have a very high exposure rate to technologies which are typically not ours. We consume them. We're also able to apply artificial intelligence in key catalytic sectors so that we can impact the low transition of young people into the labor markets and to address the issue of unemployability. I'm moving on to manufacturing, which is a central theme also for unlocking human capital investments. We need to strengthen manufacturing. Platforms are required for advanced manufacturing of new materials, and we need to strengthen the national data repositories across the continent, including Namibia. This is essential so that we can secure and make available and consolidate information, public information that is in our custodianship, that will enable governments and business to innovate and to also provide critical services like the rolling out of e-governance services, which bring government closer to the people, but also have a lot of efficiency gains. We should also bolster our cybersecurity frameworks in order for us to be able to better protect the public as we roll out services and strengthen the national data repository. Moving on to the fourth recommendation with regard to the fundamentals that need to be in place, we're still on the fundamentals, is to inform, or rather to offer economic incentives to future industries that have got the potential to be transformative and those that can engine new engines of growth. So specifically also tailoring a targeted SME approach for businesses that are in the 4IR specifically. We should also build 4IR infrastructure, but it is important that the 4IR infrastructure is coordinated and part of a comprehensive national infrastructure framework that plugs into economic and social infrastructure as well, so that we can unlock connectivity and efficiencies. Still on the foundation, it's important that the policy and our legislative frameworks are aligned and that they are supportive of the 4IR agenda, that they're coordinating across sectors, and that they are able to unlock the kind of progress that we need to see. Effective governance is condition sine qua non to unlocking efficiencies, and that will enable us to mobilize the capital that we need under a weak fiscus framework and also to accumulate wealth. So another critical and the final success factor on this level of the foundation is looking at the capacity of the state to implement and to coordinate the programs for 4IR. across different sectors, working with different stakeholders and also intergovernmental agencies. And this requires structured mechanisms to be put in place. And of course, securing energy supply, because that is the key input for industry and business activity. I'm now moving to the heart, which is the leadership mindset. Professor Marwala believes that we should be grounded in scientific and mathematical thinking, making the case that to accelerate development on the continent, we must become the owners of the technologies that we are consuming. And one way of us doing this is to document and to diffuse our knowledge by storing and including and mainstreaming our indigenous languages into technologies like Siri, for example. In this dispensation, we should embrace the logic of science and mathematics as a gateway subjects, and logic should prevail over common sense and superstition. Big data, robotics, automation, yes, they will cut jobs, but the projections are that during the next decade, the fourth industrial revolution is actually poised to create more new types of jobs in this decade, double the amount of jobs that would be shed because of automation and robotics. So while some work is going to become obsolete, the future is in blended skills, and the new currency is skills. We're going to create more types of new jobs. So what is required is continuous and lifelong learning from not only the education system, but also the labor force. The workforce needs to be continually upskilled, reskilled, and reoriented in order for us to augment old skills with new skills. Professor Marwala also advocates for a reading culture, calling for the 21st century leader to read and to write widely, to read and to write, and to be well informed. Readers are leaders, and those who do not read should not be occupying positions of leadership, pardon me. And the information age has enabled us truly to access knowledge in the digital space. And I hear a call through the text in the book to bridge the gap between Africa's absence in the body literature and also to digitize our archives. The leader's mindset is oriented towards education and should be focused on education in this era. While the Industrial Revolution is a crucial tool to unlocking growth and productivity, knowledge is going to be the crucial tool to actually harnessing and exploiting the full potential of the technologies at our disposal. So there's a strong interdependence between the value that we are deriving from the technology and the education. And we should provide education in its totality. So in other words, Professor is saying, invest to release education back into the communities and not certification back into our communities. And he makes a case for multidisciplinary training again, which is essential to equipping young people with the requisite skills to compete in the 21st century. We should be mindful that the skills are becoming the new currency, and the failure to upskill and to reskill our young people and the young trainable labor force that we have is only going to exacerbate the inequalities that we're already experiencing and that have been more pronounced during the COVID-19 pandemic, and really the fragilities exposed. Universities should continue to participate in global rankings. It's important on the principles of diversity, competition, cooperation, collaboration to improve standards and ultimately the quality of higher education and training. And the role of the state should remain grounded as a developmental state. So while governance systems should promote the fourth industrial revolution, they should not prohibit agility. We need to be nimble in a dispensation where many will be and can be left behind. And this is time for ethical leadership and for resiliency, shying away from retrogressive, divisive tendencies, ethnicity, factionalism, and in the context of Namibia, tribalism and racism, all the isms, which takes me to the next ism raised by Prof. He's arguing around the politicism and the concept where politics should be the hemogenic driver of development. He makes a case for meritocracy and for societies to be built on the merit of competency and performance in the labor markets. He says that it is unsustainable and ineffective if politicism is pursued at the expense of other vital factors such as the economy and technology. Also challenging the concept of one-dimensional political leadership as it tends to be, that is not diversified enough, that is not multidisciplinary, arguing that countries need a leadership to be distributed across many spheres of their society and not only on the top or the political spectrum. We need to enable professional specialists to operate at the top of their craft and to create the culture of leadership that impacts multitudes on a grand scale. The likes of Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. He cautions us on the dangers of one-dimensional mindsets, which can starve catalytic sectors like the arts, which are crucial sectors to establishing the spillovers, to establishing the creative culture that feeds technology, that feeds the economy, and that feeds society at large. The 21st century leader must therefore be somebody who has studied across disciplines, society, politics, economy, and technology. Hence the priority to a multidisciplinary education training system and leadership development framework. The president of Namibia agrees very much with the notion that we need to work towards a meritocratic society. The book then moves to contextualize the complex role of governance and leadership during times of adversity, and it frames the opportunities, but also the big threats that have been powered by the megatrends that we have seen unfolding over the last 5 years at least, defining global megatrends and crises. These include the public health emergency, COVID-19, which he also provides solutions on countries how to restart their economies post-lockdown. It also looks at the existential threat of climate change and water resource management, where the wars of the future are likely to be fought around water resources, service delivery in government, and how to address the issue of local government and delivering services at subnational levels, the rural-urban migration, the phenomenon, and the digital economy. These are all powerful trends that have informed and shaped the complexity within which we are designing strategies and frameworks to respond to the opportunities presented in this dispensation. At the apex, we crown all these tenets with the leadership attributes for the quintessential African leader, drawing from historical figures that could continue to inspire this generation of young Africans, and also the author. The contemporary leader here in the 21st century can emulate from Kwame Nkrumah's Pan-Africanism, his passion for the African unity, educated, exposed internationalist who was intentional to send young people out into multilateral fora and to deepen the capacity of young people through exposure and experience. The leader in the 21st century should also espouse Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe's brevity of mind, his principled character, effective communication, forging strategic alliances with a view to garner some win situations that with leading nations who are developing the technologies in the fourth industrial revolutions. Of course, these are some of the leaders that have had an influence on Professor Marwala, but I believe we all resonate with the principles because the principles are universal. Marie Curie is unique, and we could learn a lot from her mathematical and engineering thinking approach, and also her commitment to problem solve through technology. Marie Curie is one of the only people in history who has made history twice to be awarded a Nobel Prize, first as the first woman to receive the prize, and secondly as the only person to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different fields of study, chemistry and physics. And then we have Helen Joseph, who should inspire us to continue fighting for the indivisibility of freedoms. Freedoms denied to one are denied to all. To stand for the principles of solidarity, justice, humanity, and compassion in an increasingly automated world. And finally, the passionate but societal development approach of Richard Maponya is something that should reverberate and encourage the next generation to serve their communities with humility and with benevolence. To conclude, the milieu of African leadership has evolved over what our President Geingob, hypothesizes to be 3 waves of African leadership. In the first wave, African leadership was categorized by extraordinary liberators, founding fathers, such as Kwame Nkrumah, who Professor Marwala quotes at the beginning of the text, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Modibo Keita of Mali, Sekou Touré of Guinea-Conakry, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Agustino Neto of Angola, Samora Machel of Mozambique, Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia. And with respect to the settler colonies in Southern Africa, we have Sam Nujoma, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, Nelson Mandela of South Africa, who are also among this league of extraordinary personalities and founding fathers of the democracies of the continent. Then there was the second wave, which surfaced during the Cold War era, where geopolitics divided the world into the East and the West. And this dispensation was characterized by coups d'etat and one-party states. Where Namibia, Africa, and South Africa are now is that we have entered into the third wave of African leadership. A dispensation that is democratic, that is categorized by cementing, establishing sound governance architecture, where the focus in this third wave is to strengthen the processes, the systems, and the institutions to uphold governance principles of accountability and transparency so that we can foster trust. So, Professor, I heed your caution of the danger of a single-sided story, the single narrative. And as you accurately paraphrase Muntu Muyeza, we cannot be happy as Africa as long as we are technologically lagging behind other nations. And I also agree with your reformulation of the quotation by the founding father, President Kwame Nkrumah, that rather let us seek education first and the rest shall follow. Professor, I found this book to be an easy read. It was a quick, easy read. Considering the complexity and the highly technical subject matter, it was really educative and informative and pragmatic also in its policy and recommendations for policymakers, lawmakers, academia, business, and the like. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your response.
Thank you, Daisry, for your review. I now invite Prof to provide his reaction, reflection, and respond to Daisy's review. Prof, the floor is yours.
I hope you can hear me now. No, thank you very much, Daisry, for that wholesome response. I did not come here alone. I have come here with the chairman of council of the University of Johannesburg, Mr. Mike Teke, who is obviously quite a well-known businessman in South Africa, especially in the coal industry. So together we run here at the University of Johannesburg a reading club because we firmly believe that for Africa to move forward, there is no middle ground. We have to have a literate society. And illiteracy today is no longer just the inability to read or write, but it is also the inability to understand technology and to understand the world with all its complexity. I am quite impressed by how well, Daisry, you really grasped what I wanted to talk about. Now, why did I decide to write this book? Because this book actually came shortly after I wrote another book called Closing the Gap, the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa. The reason was actually quite simple. I am a writer. I have written 22 books. But what always bothered me was that if I go to bookshops, certainly here in South Africa, I could never find any of my books. I had to go to London or to Boston in order to be able to see my books on the shelf. So that worried me. The second reason was because I grew up in the northern part of South Africa, a place called Venda. And I was very close to my grandmother. And my grandmother always used to tell me that, because she couldn't read or write. And then she will say to me, explain to me what mathematics is. And I will try to explain to her. And then she says, I don't understand. Because I don't understand, you probably don't know what mathematics is. So that idea that if you cannot explain something simple enough for a non-expert to understand, it probably talks more about your inability to communicate or your inability to understand the information you are trying to communicate, rather than the inability of the person who is hearing to understand. So I really wanted to write a book that was accessible. The other reason was because every time I read the books, and I love African literature, and indeed, we have been reading African literature last year, Things Fall Apart and so on and so forth. And as a matter of fact, there is an upcoming book, Leadership Lessons from the 50 books I read. It's going to be coming out in July. Was that every time I read books, I couldn't see myself in the books. I couldn't identify the examples that are being used. And I really wanted to write a book that is truly grounded in my culture, the African culture, in our languages, in our culture, in our worldview. Because part of the reason why many concepts, you don't really understand them very well, is simply because they are not written for us. And when things are not written for you, you are not going to understand. And when we write something, the people in Europe probably will not be able to understand if it is not contextualized in the world of Europe. So now, I firmly believe that the African continent must move forward. I firmly believe that the leadership, we need a new type of leadership style in Africa. I firmly believe that, almost 70 years, not quite, but close to 65 years, ever since Ghana became independent, we have really struggled to create a developed society. There are some good things that are happening in the African continent. You go to Rwanda, you go to Kenya, you go to Namibia. I have been to Namibia, and I really absolutely enjoyed it. So there are some good practices, but on the whole, when you go to the DRC, when you go to many parts of the African continent, you can see that this is the continent that actually needs development. And who better be at the forefront of development, such development, than the Africans themselves? So maybe just to say that I really feel strongly that there are some key attributes that I think we need to cultivate as leaders. And for me, a leader is not necessarily somebody who holds political office. If you are a principal of a school, you are a leader. If you are a teacher in a school, especially primary school, you are actually a leader. Because somebody actually puts it this very well, that if you want to know the character of a nation, you have to go and study the character of its teachers. Because in many countries, almost every country, we as a community give our children to teachers at a very young age. and expect teachers to spend 5, 6, 7 hours with the young students more than they are spending time with their own parents. So this is a very important leadership role. And unless we realize that it is important and capacitate it appropriately, we are going to be left behind. So maybe some of the key issues that I think as a society we need to understand. We need to learn, and we need to learn from our history, no matter how painful it is. Africa has made many, many mistakes. Those mistakes are lessons for us to correct them in the future. An error only becomes a mistake when it is repeated. So no matter how difficult the history can be, let us record it, let us write about it, let us learn from it so that we can be able to take the African society forward. The second thing that I actually think is also quite important is that Africa must be agile. It must adapt. And it must adapt to conquer very difficult terrains, because we are already behind, which basically means for us to catch up, we have to move faster than the rest of the world. And for us to be able to do that, we must be agile. Now we are living in an era of COVID-19. Are we agile enough to be able to reinvent our economies so that we are able to leapfrog and catch up with the rest of the world? The other thing, the lessons that I really want to also put forward, the third one, we need to train leaders. There is no such a thing such as a person who is born a leader. We make that mistake. Leaders are trained. For you to be able to understand navigating your beautiful nation into the technological era, you need to learn about technology. You need to learn about skills on how to manage technology. And you cannot manage technology unless you understand it. The English are known for forming clubs, whether they are country clubs, whether they are the scouts, and so on and so forth. Those are avenues for them to train their next generation of leaders. And in Africa, we have to do it. It might be in the sports field. When I go to my primary school, I am quite appalled to realize that things such as sports, which is very important to develop interpersonal skills, are no longer there. We also have to cultivate a developmental mindset, because it is really about development. It is really about taking our people to a developed state. So there has to be a mindset that is developmentally orientated. One of the things that I really complain about here in South Africa is that we have cultivated a consumer mindset, a mindset where we like to consume goods instead of producing them. So how do we leapfrog from consumption to production? Production leads to consumption, but it will even be better if we are consuming what we have actually created. We need to remove patriarchy from our society. We will not be able to move forward if women are excluded from the means and the mode and the ways of production. Whether it is at the government level, whether it is at the industrial level, whether it is at the community level, all our people, especially women, must be fairly represented, because if they are not, it will almost be like half of ourselves not being given the chance to move forward. We need to deal with issues of language. This is a very controversial one. I go to Google Translate. I realize that many of our languages are actually excluded. Yes, isiZulu is there, Tshivenda, which is my language, is not there, and so on and so forth. We need to create economies of scale. Now, the controversial proposal that I always say is that we really need to find a common African language. It doesn't matter what it is, which should be taught in all our schools, whether it is Swahili, whether it is Yoruba, whether it is, whatever language. It is important because once you have that, then you have economies of scale. China is China because people see a single market. Can you imagine if people saw a single market when they look at Africa and how much progress we will be able to make? So we should focus on that. I mean, I think the issues of technological and economic development, Daisry, you have already covered. The issues of the diaspora. I went to Singapore, the National University of Singapore, and I was taken to this prestigious college that is headed by, then it was headed by a professor of nanotechnology in Singapore. When I arrived there, I realized that this professor of nanotechnology is actually from the African continent. He is actually from Nigeria. Now the question is, how many Africans are living in the diaspora? And some of these Africans are actually operating in some of the significant centers of development, whether it is Silicon Valley, whether it is London, the financial hub of London. Let us find ways of connecting with Africans in the diaspora. Does not mean they have to come back, because it's sometimes beneficial for them to be there. But let us engage them. Let us invite them to come and tell us about what is happening, what is the next best thing, and what do we need to do in order to prepare ourselves. So it is important, and I'm one of those people who believe that, some of us must be lots of us must be in the African continent. Some of us must go and learn and even stay there so that they can be a conduit between the development of wherever they are to their home countries. India is a classic example of that. It's not accidental that Google is doing much of its development in India. The CEO of Google is from India. He was born in India. He went to university in India. It's not an accident that Microsoft is now putting hubs in India. The CEO of Microsoft is from India. So it is very important that we strategically position ourselves in all these sectors, important sectors of economic activity around the world. And of course, we are not going to be able to do that unless we are very, very, we plan. Now, the other one, the United States had a president. The president was called Roosevelt. Francis Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a very important president of the United States. He used to say, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." He's known for that. It is known for that, speak softly and carry a big stick. It turns out that it's an African proverb. When I was reading a biography about him, I realized that it is actually an African proverb, even though now we associate with it. What he basically was saying is that be determined and quiet about what you do. Don't speak, don't reveal your secrets. Deng Xiaoping put it very well when he was advising the Chinese. Hide your intentions and bide your time. Very, very important. And obviously, the big issue in Africa today is what we call, and lastly, this is the last point I'm going to make, the demographic dividend. The rest of the world is aging. The rest of the world is actually aging. Because the rest of the world is aging, people are saying that useful societies are going to be new centers of production. Now, Africa is actually a very young society. The majority of our people are actually young. How do we organize ourselves so that demographic dividend actually becomes a demographic dividend, not a demographic problem or liability? We are not going to see the demographic dividend unless we invest in our youth. Access to education, access to skills, sending them abroad so that they can be able to learn best practices from the rest of the world, making sure that they understand the rest of Africa. One of the things that Mr. Teke and I have done here at the University of Johannesburg is a project called Africa by Bus. Africa by Bus is a project of the University of Johannesburg. Of course, we had to suspend it because of COVID, where we used to take our students by bus to the rest of the African continent. Because we believe that for us to unlock that demographic dividend, we must have the youth who understand the continent of Africa and its beauty and its problems, because they are supposed to form businesses that are going to unlock those solutions. And that Africa by Bus has been to Botswana, it has been to Namibia, it has been to Zimbabwe, it has been to Mozambique, and it has been to Zambia. So we were saying, until the lockdown came, that we are going to Kigali on our way to Kampala. And we tell them, and it's not only students, even staff, we say, look around. The reason why we're doing it by bus is because we know that if you are flown there, you only see what is at the airport. The problems are not, Africa's problems are not at airports or five-star hotels. Africa's problems are in our roads, in our villages. That is where we can be able to build solutions that will actually be able to unlock economic growth potential. So thank you very much, Daisry. Dala is also here. I know her quite well, and I am actually looking forward to visiting Namibia again, you know, and beautiful country. And I wish you all the best with your reading club, because it is really about reading. Leaders must be readers. Good leaders are always readers. I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. I think one of the things that Prof, as a takeaway, is really the issue about encouraging leaders to go beyond the call of duties. And one of the reaction that came into the conversation this morning is from Ndeli, who is asking, and perhaps maybe I throw this to you, Daisry, that Africa needs to develop for itself and set requirements for export of our products than what we are currently doing. What is your reaction on that, Daisry?
So I think Prof touched on it, and Professor, thank you very much for that intervention. You raised so many pertinent points that I'm going to put back into the conversation as I respond to Ndeli's question. The one thing that intrigued me about the Africa by Bus mission is not only the exposure through experience, in order for you to really have the user experience of the difficulties and the challenges that are involved in factor mobility. On the other side, it's also really for you to see how African infrastructure is not integrated and how it's not inward looking and how it actually prohibits Africa to trade with herself. All of our key infrastructure is outward looking to the ports and to the rest of the world. So a country like Namibia, with our limited population market size, we have to look at the continental market. We've got the agreements in place in terms of the sub-Saharan and now the AFCFTA. The challenge beyond value addition, once you've added the value and you need to do export, is actually factor mobility, is moving that item from Walfish Bay to Nairobi cost effectively and competitively. I think infrastructure is a key enabler, but at the moment, with the kind of infrastructural deficit that we have, it's also an impediment to Africa realizing her ambitions on the AFCFTA, even though there are plans to strengthen our infrastructure master plans. Maybe while I have the floor, I'm going to put it out for the professor to respond in the next intervention, and for anybody else really, is Prof, education is so fundamental, and you make the point to say that we need to reform, we need to modernize, and we need to get the foundations right. China did it under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, and within the space of a generation, we saw that country lift millions out of poverty, catch up after over 500 years of falling behind the West. They managed to really not just leapfrog, but quantum leap, because they were able to transform their educational sector fundamentally. We struggle in Africa to deconstruct and to make the educational sector as agile and as nimble and responsive as it needs to be. And as an educationalist, as an academic, I really want to hear from you where the opportunities are in order for us to turn this big Titanic so that our sector can be responsive, can be agile, can meet the demands of our economic transformation agenda today. How come China could modernize?
Yes, Prof, you can come in.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I was just muted. So, China obviously has modernized quite quickly, Well, not quite quickly, in fact, quite late, because it is only modernizing now. The country that has modernized the fastest is actually Japan, because Japan was introduced to Western technology in 1850, and 40 years later, it was a fully developed society. So they moved people from the agricultural farmers, who people were in the field, to factories, all in 40 years. So what were the elements, and those elements that you see in that we saw in the rise of Japan are the same elements that we see in China. Chinese people are obsessed about education. In fact, when I was there, I was told that, they take their kids to school. That is the normal school, government school. And many of them, after school, they send them to another school for extra lessons, to the point that an average family in China actually spends 30% of their disposable income on the education of their child. Remember, this is a society that for a long time, for the past 40 years or so, you could only have one child. So the obsession about the education in China explains somewhat some of the developmental things that we actually see here in China. Now, coming back to the African experience, what can we do? The first mindset that we should have is to realize that the school is just part of the educational experience. As parents, we have to educate our children. We have to read for them. We have to expose them to things that are actually that will nourish their curiosity and their minds. And then of course you'll say, but what happens to those whose parents cannot be able to read or write? You know, communities, that is where communities come through. You know, in our communities, are we organizing reading clubs where we get students, the young kids, to actually you know, to read for them? Here in Johannesburg, and I do have children, you know, you go to the Johannesburg Library in Center on Saturday morning. You could go there and then you will have somebody who is reading for the kids. Of course, it is in a group, you know. So that is when now you are doing it for the community. It's not part of the schooling system. It's part of the extracurricular activity. So we need to do that. Then the second thing is that we should be production orientated. The idea of building things is no longer in our educational system. I seem to remember when I was a young man that at school they will say, go and get clay in the river and make a car, for example. You know, those are very, very important skills, making things, because that is what we ultimately teach when people go to study engineering. I seem to remember when I was young, when they say, go and cut grass and make a mat. And making a mat is not an easy skill. It's a very complicated skill. Now, if you are going to expect an 8 or 9-year-old to make a mat, can you imagine what you're doing to their minds? Can you imagine? Do you think if you reinforce that culture, you will struggle with such an individual when you put them in the factory floor? No. So education must actually become part of our culture, should involve families, societies, and it should be based on making things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Prof, one of the things that I want to pick your brain while we are on this point, in your book you really emphasize on what you term boundaryless human machine system, and that's really a concept that you are saying that we should create leaders that are able to manage human and machine at the same time. Perhaps if you can just expand on that, and how relevant is that in the question of the fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah, thank you very much. So you see, that is what you would call multidisciplinary learning, and it is very, very important for the fourth industrial revolution. You see, if you go to Germany and you look at what the Germans have achieved technologically, you look at BMW, you look at Siemens, you look at Daimler Benz, you look at VW with its you know, range of cars, including Porsche. People don't know Porsche is part of VW. An impressive society. But if you ask the Germans, what is your Facebook? What is the German version of Facebook or Twitter or Google? There's none. Why? If you go to the United States, obviously the largest economy in the world, probably one of the biggest producers of cars, General Motors, Chrysler, Ford, those are American companies. Then you see Apple, Microsoft, then Google, Facebook. Why? The reason is because the German educational system is too narrow. If you go there and learn mechanical engineering, you will learn a lot about mechanical engineering and very little about something else. Now, because of this narrow educational experience, which has been reproduced over in South Africa, and so on and so forth, we have really battled to be full participants in the fourth industrial revolution. When I was an undergraduate student in North America, studying engineering, I took 3 acting classes. I took 2 psychology classes. I took 1 history class. Can somebody be able to design a speech recognition system unless they had studied linguistics and computer science, multidisciplinary thinking? Can somebody be able to, now I was reading that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, has just joined a startup in Silicon Valley that is about coaching, online coaching. Can you come up with a technology on coaching unless you understand technology, but you also have to understand human beings, human behavior, and so on and so forth? So it is very important that when you go to the University of Namibia, when you go to the University of Johannesburg, that our students must actually be exposed to all areas of society, whether they're in the human or the technological subjects. Here at the University of Johannesburg, a course, Introduction to Artificial Intelligence, is compulsory for all our 50,000 students who come in, irrespective of what they are studying. Of course, it's not technical in the sense that you need to be a computer science to take it, but after you take it, you actually understand what this technology is about and what it can be able to do. Secondly, we realize that technology is not only the important thing. We also have another course called Africa Insights. Africa Insights is compulsory for all our 52,000 students. Because we are saying that if you are going to be solving Africa's problems, we don't know which Africa's problems, you better understand Africa. And many of those problems you will have to discover them yourselves when you're reading, when you're understanding the politics, when you're understanding Africa's economy, and so on and so forth. So multidisciplinarity is very, very crucial for us to succeed in the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you, Prof. And Daisry, while we are on this, I just wanted to bring you into the discussion by, in the book, Professor Marwala talks about this whole notion around a wait and see game. Many African countries are having this laissez-faire approach of how to embark on this fourth industrial revolution. From a Namibian perspective, what would you think would be required for Namibia to position herself to embrace the fourth industrial revolution? And really, I want you to dive into the elements of the readiness of government, I think the legislation provision.
No, I actually think we need to obviously make sure that our educational our educational system brings to the forth people with 3 core skills. I actually think 3 core skills are very, very important to survive in the fourth industrial age. Logical thinking skills, ability to understand basic mathematics. I'm not talking about advanced, basic percentages, ratios, and so on and so forth. And ability to communicate. Those are the 3 skills that our educational system must have. And if we have those skills in abundance, then the 4th industrial revolution is going to be easy. Then the second thing that we ought to do, we need to create infrastructure that will facilitate the adoption of the 4th industrial revolution. Government must open up to 4th industrial revolution thinking. Government officials, the University of Namibia must have short learning courses that expose important leaders in our society to the ideas of the 4th industrial revolution. Here at the University of Johannesburg, we have a course called computational intelligence. It is designed for people who are working. It is done online. And the idea is that, if everybody is talking about machine learning, I sit on a board of a bank, everybody is talking about machine learning. And I keep on asking myself, wouldn't it be nice if everybody actually understand what it is, so that they can be able to go to their environment and see how they can be able to change their environment with this new thinking that has actually emerged. So continuous learning is very, very important. And continuous learning is even more important for people who are already in the workforce, because they were trained in the past before these technologies became important.
If I can add to Prof, because he really spoke to the heart of the issue. There's some feedback. Prof, I think we have a constraint challenge. In the book, you talk about the wait and see game. And this wait and see is not really because of inertia or an unwillingness to prepare for an imminent future. I think it's about constraints. For example, Africa's research and development investment, just in terms of African governments, I think we're investing about 0.5% of GDPs. Some countries are doing better than others. In Namibia, I can give you an indication that we were investing about 0.35% of our GDP as at 2015 into research and technology. And you will agree with me that the rate at which technology is doubling its capacity, evolving every 18 months, the pace is very quick. And in order for African governments to really prepare for an unavoidable future, as you state in the book, a pervasive revolution, we have to not only increase that threshold to the 1% target that we had committed ourselves by 2022, we have to significantly double that amount. So when you talk about infrastructure, there's the hard infrastructure, and then there's this kind of, I call it soft, the institutional infrastructure, the capacity in order for us to fully embrace, fully harness and exploit the opportunities that are presented. So I want to make that statement and close it with a question from your experience on the commission. I find that the levers are there, but there's some fragmentation. How would you guide some kind of overarching and coherent framework? What should be the most important thing, especially for developing nations who are making a substandard investment into R&D? And R&D is the one that will unlock the development capabilities.
I think one thing that we ought to do is to pull our resources together. The idea that small countries can be able to do enough research on their own let me just give you an example. The COVID vaccine. I don't think South Africa can actually afford that type of research, because this is the research that when you look at Pfizer, these are people who spend $10 billion to develop a particular drug. And what you don't know is that there are many other drugs that they've developed and they had to throw away because they never worked. No. Now, as SADC now, what can we do? If we say, let us pull our institution together, the National Research Foundation of South Africa has just appointed its CEO, who used to be my PhD student. And we say, why don't we make it the National Research Foundation for Southern Africa? And we say, every Southern African country must contribute a certain amount, and researchers from any of these countries must have access to any of the infrastructure of the National Research Foundation. Then we are talking about economies of scale. And if we have economies of scale, then we can be able to do some of those research. Now, coming back to the issue of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, because I actually think that the Fourth Industrial Revolution is really the sort of research where the barriers are quite low. Because you don't have to build a large factory. If you wanted a huge chemical plant, you probably have to put a huge initial capital outlay, which you probably cannot be able to afford. Here we're talking about technology that is software-based. And much of that technology is even available for free. Okay, for free, maybe, yeah. Google gives you all AI algorithms. Now, if you want to do research there, all you need is just a computer and knowledge. And now you can even get knowledge from the internet. So this is an opportunity for us to actually get into, and one of the things that I've realized is that that whole Fourth Industrial Revolution is missing our culture. Face recognition systems that have been developed were developed for Asian and European faces, not for African faces. That is an opportunity, and it is not expensive. Okay, maybe collecting the faces will obviously require you to have storage capacity. Now you can even buy the cloud. So we can sit down, we need to sit down as the African Union, as SADC, and say, yeah, there are many things we can work on, but where would we have the maximum impact? Because the whole world knows where they are specializing. South Korea is specializing on heavy machinery and electronics. You know, United States is specializing on many things, but they are leading in software development, for example, because all the big software companies are from there. You know, Germany, you know. So we need to find ways in which we can be able to identify which areas do we specialize on, and we pull all our resources together so that we can have economies of scale.
Prof, thank you very much for that comment, where you are alluding on what is our competitive edge, or as a continent in our respective countries. There's a comment, a very interesting comment, I think maybe is an addition to what you are saying, and I'll be very keen to hear your two comments, more maybe starting with Daisry. It's coming from Ada Angula, who says, to my mind, comparisons are not always healthy. We should ask ourselves, what can we offer? Not to try to compete in technology or science when it is not our area of expertise. Then she continued to say, I've read how countries like Singapore and Dubai made the conscious decision to focus on services and consulting and professional services. So her question really is, what can we identify as our talents that we can focus on mastering as an offering to the global market? Maybe your reaction on that. What is really that is our talent that we can harness as an offering?
I think we need to focus on, firstly, on creating things that we consume that the rest of the world is not able to produce for us, or it is not able to produce well for us. I mean, I'll give you an example. Before the advent of e-commerce, now you can go and buy things, electronic money and so on and so forth. The people in Kenya were were using telecommunication to exchange money in M-Pesa. Probably the first one in the world. Obviously, the rest of the world has copied it and have put very fancy systems that they use now. So we need, first and foremost, let us create products out of our needs. I have talked about speech recognition software that, you go to Siri, does not understand any of our languages. That is a business opportunity. You go to, in the medical field, the disease profile, our disease profile is not the same as the disease profile of people who live in Europe. Certain tropical diseases are simply not big research areas because they are not a problem. Bilharzia, all those sort of things. Let us invest in that. Let us invest in that. And I am confident that as we invest on things that we need, the spin-offs will actually be huge, and we'll actually start exporting things out of the continent. Africa is very rich. If we can be able to connect, Daisry has talked about this, if we can be able to connect and to trade, and to travel to each other's country instead of going to Disneyland, we can even be a much, much richer continent and be able to make products that make us, that facilitate that movement, that connectivity, and so on and so forth.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof, for that. We also have 5 minutes with our time, and I just wanted to first, before you go off, Prof, maybe just to allow maybe just one remark from Daisry, so that at least we can just wrap up the conversation, and maybe let me just give it to you, Daisry, quickly before Prof leaves.
Prof and everyone who attended the session, thank you very much for adding value. I think we are going to need more of these conversations. Certainly an hour and a half will never be enough, but I think the conversation has started. My thinking is just that technology is the tool that we use in order for us to unlock capability. So in whatever area we decide we have a comparative or a competitive advantage in, whether it's manufacturing, industrialization, or services, we are going to have to need technology in order for us to benefit from the efficiencies that it brings. We are definitely playing catch up, but I do think because of the size and profile of our country and population, the services industry is a strategic bet for Namibia, and one that we need to intentionally position for that kind of investment. I'm concerned that this meeting might cut because it was an hour and a half. If it does, I'm apologizing in advance. And I'm also thanking you, Professor Tshilidzi, for availing yourself, for pouring into us, for inspiring. And we'll certainly be in touch. I believe you are a friend of Namibia. So we look forward to engaging you as we strengthen our 4IR national frameworks and digital strategies for the country. Over to you, moderator.
Yeah, thank you very much, colleague Daisry, and thank you, Prof. Marwala. And as we conclude, colleagues, you would agree with Daisry that this is 1 hour and a half is not sufficient. But I just want to make some conclusion remark by stating that this is our first inaugural meeting, and we will have another one on the 24th of April, where we'll really talk about the beautiful one, not yet born, by Aya Kwei Ama, a renowned author from Ghana. And we believe that this conversation will just enrich ourselves, and as we begin to critically add to the body of knowledge. And what Daisry will be really looking at in the next session is really the context of the state formation, governance, and the leadership, going back to the first sovereign nation and the oldest democracy of the continent, Ghana. And having said that, Daisry and Prof, thank you very much for your contribution. I just want to leave you quickly with a small quote by the Nigerian poet Ben Okri, who once said, "We have not yet arrived, but every point at which we stop requires a redefinition of our destination." And for those that have joined us, we thank you. Please stay safe. Let's obey the regulation. Africa needs us more than ever. Goodbye and see you next time. Thank you.